music fans. Welcome to Bands and Beers with Brennen. I'm your host, Brennen. The band today is Intronaut, an excellent progressive metal or post-metal band. The beer today is Sandhills Farmhouse Ale by Red Circle. And today my guest is John. Super happy to get to chat with you. We also talked about The Contortionists, so check out that video as well if you like our commentary. You want to introduce yourself, John?
Yeah, so hi, I'm John. Brennen and I used to be in a band together called Forbidden Conjecture back in university. We both played the guitars, and that was fun. These days, I'm mostly just working on this project, this like software development project, so it can be posted. It's a website called getreplayvalue.com.
Oh, sweet. What's that project all about?
So
Your little plug here.
You can check, yeah, you can check it out, but it's basically a site for trading retro games. So,
Like video games?
Yeah, video games, consoles, accessories. So it's really focused on just like that community.
Cool.
I'm a big retro game fan, and I wasn't really happy with the options that are available. Most people are using eBay, which I think is. If you've ever been on eBay recently, you're like, did I get transported back to like 1994? Like, this website is so out of date.
They don't even use Amazon?
No, I don't think, not for like, because you can't really you can't sell as like a consumer, right? Like, so if I have games and I just want to sell them to somebody, like, you have to pay to open a store on Amazon. So
yeah, I guess
I'm aiming for like trying to, empower people who are collectors to be able to trade their stuff like easier without the overhead or like.
That's a cool idea. I think it could apply to music too, like collectors for vinyl and CDs, and like even like people have like tapes of like rare obscure black metal if they want to like find it on the internet, or like early demos. I could totally see that, or like sounds like a really cool project.
Yeah.
All right. How about your what's your least favorite Intronaut album?
Yeah, so this is interesting. So I have to. It's this new one, Fluid Existential Inversions. Like, I've listened to it like 2 or 3 times. It's totally forgettable. Like, I don't even remember like them at all. Like, I didn't think it was very good. I think so. To me, what I always really liked about Intronaut, I mean, like, they have some pretty interesting like sort of orchestrations. Like, the writing style of the band's really interesting, but like, I thought that like the 2 standout players were Danny, the drummer, and Joe, the bassist. Like, I think those 2, if you didn't have those 2 elements in all of their early stuff, like, you wouldn't have had. They were doing some interesting things with the guitars, but it's like, it's how that stuff is like works off that incredible drumming and those like really clean bass lines that really gives it a unique sound. And I just feel like this album, Fluid Existential Inversions, is like, it's missing that, which is what I think is the element that makes them interesting as a band. And like, for example, like, I mean, Cubensis is like, it's a pretty okay track, but it doesn't have that like those like creamy bass lines or anything that I want. It's more like this album was a lot heavier than the previous few albums, which is they're kind of going away from that like heaviness of Void. Since Void, they've been getting less heavy and a little bit more experimental, and this album like kind of, it kind of goes back to like the heaviness, like hard hitting of Void, but without like, Void still has like these really cool bass lines and stuff. This album to me is like totally forgettable, which I was quite disappointed listening to it.
Oh, that's too bad. Did you still have any favorite song on it, or any standout moments?
I'll say like, Cubensis, I think, is kind of got some
Yeah.
cool. It's like got some cool riffs, kind of, but
Yeah.
nothing like. So like I listened to it a few times, and like normally like. So I usually listen to an album start to finish, and so I don't remember all of the track names.
Yeah.
And for example, I'm like, holy shit, this is really cool, and then I like will flip back to see like what song was that. But that didn't happen anytime I was listening to this album, so I don't even really remember like most of the songs.
That was me too. The first couple times I listened to that, and I was looking for the standout tracks for this conversation so that we could like say our favorite songs.
Yeah.
But you actually for all of their albums, I didn't really know song names for any of their albums. I just kind of like threw them on start to finish, and I totally agree. It's like very much a bass and drum and bass driven band.
Yeah.
And I guess this album didn't have their earlier drummer. I think it's the only one that does it, right?
Yeah. Like the drummer they got, Alex Rudinger, like he's definitely a good drummer. Like I've heard him in other stuff before. I think just like the style is not the same, and so I think that influences sort of the decisions that they took.
Well, yeah, and they brought him in as this like studio ringer, right? Like they probably wrote like it probably ended up with like the other guys in the band that weren't Danny Walker like writing all the drum parts. I don't know how the composition for this worked.
Yeah.
Like they might have written it all themselves, and then they bring in a studio ringer who could just kind of play anything. But it didn't have the same kind of crazy polymeter syncopated like awesome ridiculous strumming some of the other stuff had. I still thought it was a pretty cool album, and it's not the one that I'm gonna say as my worst. My least favorite, I'll say Void from 2006, their first full-length album. I think, like you were saying, this one's like their heaviest. The vocals, I think, I don't know if they're all harsh or if there's any melodic.
I think it's pretty much all harsh.
It's just all screaming. And I found this one, like you were saying about fluid existential inversions, I found Void didn't have memorable stuff or like as catchy stuff as the others. But I think it's still good. I don't think they have any bad albums. My favorite song on Void when I was listening to it again, because I would not have known any song names before I kind of re-listened to them for this chat, but my favorite song when I was re-listening was Nostalgic Echo.
Okay, yeah.
And you were telling me that it's fretless bass on all their songs. I noticed that a lot this time when I was re-listening to them. I'm like, oh, that sounds like fretless bass. Like you just hear how it sounds and like how the notes maybe aren't like perfectly in the perfect tuning that I would normally hear. They kind of just like slide into them, and it's got a nice sound to it. You don't hear too many bands doing that, so I really like that.
Yeah, it's cool. Their bassist, Joe Lester, is like he went to school or like he's like a trained classical bassist. He can play upright, and he likes to play the fretless. And I was saying earlier, like that's really like their part of their iconic sound is like his style of playing.
Yeah. I can't think of too many other bands. I think maybe Cynic used the fretless bass on some songs. But
yeah, I think they always use fretless.
Cynic does too.
I think Sean Malone, their bassist, likes the fretless. And there's a few other bands that I can't really think off the top of my head, but also
Gucci Band, Between the Buried and Me has used fretless on some songs, but usually they don't.
There's this Italian death metal band that I like called Sadist, and they use a fretless. If you haven't listened to Sadist, you should check out Sadist.
I have not. Maybe I'll check them out.
They're pretty cool. They're old stuff, like early 2000s is a little rough in terms of production. There's definitely cool ideas, but they broke up and got together again in this is a little digression, but I'm just gonna check. They got together again in got together again in 2007 and released an album. Since then, all of their albums have been like really cool. So if you want a good intro, I would listen to anything 2007 plus. But these guys are really cool. Like the main guitar, they only have one guitarist, and they don't have a keyboardist. But there's tons of keyboard. And I watched a live video, and I swear to God, the guitarist is like playing the guitar and the keyboard at the same time.
Oh, I've seen some people do that before too. I think the other band that I've seen do that, but it's crazy. It's just because when you're like fast enough with that one hand and you just like do everything with tapping and you can play the piano too. It's crazy.
But yeah, they have a lot of fretless bass in their stuff too, and it sounds really cool. Like you said, it's a rarer thing, but when you hear it, you're like, oh man, it sounds. I love fretless. Yeah,
once your ear gets used to what that sound is, every time you hear it, you're like, oh, it's a fretless bass.
Yeah.
Probably the first few times I listened to Intronaut, I didn't pick up on that, but then after a while, it's like you can't unhear it once you hear it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's really cool. I guess the other standout track on Void for me was Gleamer. Again, just great intro riffs in this band, amazing drumming, lots of heavy parts. That's it for me on Void. How about your second least favorite, Intronaut?
Yeah, so second least favorite is probably the direction of Last Things. And I mean, I think this one is a little more like standout than, I think it's more standout than like Fluid Existential Inversions. Like, I remember this album a lot better. And it's kind of like more like par for the course. I didn't think they were doing anything particularly like, you know, after what you heard in the like previous 2-3 albums, like what you heard in this album was kind of like par for the course, like wasn't very different. So it's definitely good, but it just didn't like blow me away when I heard it. But I mean, I like the song Fast Worms and Digital Gerrymandering. I think were two pretty cool tracks.
Sweet.
And I think Soul Ponticello, I think, is another cool one as well.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah,
we might be aligned on songs on that one, and some of the best ones. But I'm going to pick a different second least favorite album. For me, I'm going to go with Valley of Smoke from 2010, their third album. I think it's better than their first, but I don't know if it outdid their second. And I was re-listening, I think their second album might have been better than this. And this one, again, I guess memorability is part of how we do these rankings, because they're all good albums.
Yeah.
I think this one might have been the first Intronaut album I heard, though. I'm not sure. It might have been this one, or it might have been 2013's Habitual Levitation.
Yeah.
But this one, there is some really cool stuff on it. I think the coolest thing when I was re-listening to it was the title track, Valley of Smoke. It's an instrumental song, I think.
Yeah.
And I actually looked on Wikipedia, and it features Justin Chancellor of Tool, which is another band that I love. I also love him as a bass player.
Yeah, that is a cool track, because you can actually like you can there's two bassists on the track, but you can tell which one is which, because Justin Chancellor's bass tone is like really distinctive.
Yeah, for sure.
And Joe's bass tone is also really distinctive, so you can.
Yeah, I've never heard. I don't know if I've heard many songs that have two bass players on the song, but this is one of them, and it's very unique. And yeah, they don't muddy each other up. They have very distinctive sounds. That I don't think Justin Chancellor plays fretless. His is fretted, and it's Joe Lester, right, the bass player for Intronaut. His is fretless, and they kind of just trade parts back and forth.
Yeah.
And then they start like overlapping, and you can hear them both distinctly. It's got a sweet drum intro, lots of rhythmic and hypnotic stuff. Yeah, drums are great on this. The other standout track for me on this one was Elegy, the opening track.
Okay.
It might be the first song of theirs that I heard. Um, every song, they do start to have like a same sound to all of their songs. That might be my one criticism of Intronaut, is that it is hard to tell one song from the next, and the songs don't tend to have as much of like an identity.
Yeah.
Every song kind of has the same thing with like awesome polymetric drums and like fretless bass, and then they have these just like ambient kind of guitar, or almost like the low djenty kind of guitar, and the vocals are just the vocals aren't really the main part of this band.
Yeah.
Sure, they're kind of just there. But it's still a really good album, enjoyable for me.
Cool.
So I guess we're on to your third least favorite.
Third least favorite.
Middle of the road.
Oh yeah. So for me, that would be Void. I have to say.
Yeah.
And I like this album. When I like the first album I think I listened to in full from Intronaut was Prehistoricisms, and
2008.
yeah. So and I was really into the band, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna go back and listen to this album. And listening to it, like, I was like, it is a lot heavier, it's got more of this like death metal-y thing kind of going on, but you can still pick out those really distinctive elements. Like there is like the bass lines really stick out in some parts in like a really cool way. Like I was probably one of my favorite songs here is like Fault Lines, and I think like there's really cool parts with the bass where like like sort of like 2/3 through the track they start playing some like chords, but like the bass is like bouncing around through notes of the chords, so it adds like a lot of like distinct elements. And like there will be a lot of parts even in these older albums where like the bass just like breaks through, kind of like cuts through what's happening with the guitars to do like these kind of
the bass is the lead.
Yeah, the bass becomes the lead, and I think that element of it's really cool. And so like as a first album, it's like it doesn't have sort of like the core elements of it doesn't have as much of those core elements that really made the band unique later on, but you can see like the beginnings of that in the writing, which I think is really cool. But yeah, in terms of like favorite tracks, like Fault Lines, Nostalgic Echo is really cool, and Ice Blocks I think is neat as well.
Sweet. All right, my third least favorite is the new one, Fluid Existential Inversions, their sixth album. First one not to feature Danny Walker. Like you said, they got the excellent drummer Alex Rudinger to play, and he does a great job, but it's just not quite the level of Danny Walker.
Yeah. Like he is a great player. Like I've heard him in a lot of other things, and I've seen some videos on YouTube of him playing, like through tracks, and like he's a great drummer. Like he's one of those drummers that can just play. Like you put some here's some drums, and he'll hit it out.
That's probably legitimately what happened. Like I'm trying to imagine the process for making this album. Like they probably had like MIDI like composed stuff for this already, and they're just like, hey, listen to this. It was like, all right, I'm a piece to just play it. So like the performance is still perfect. Maybe it's something about the composition of the drums that's different.
Yeah.
I don't know if Danny Walker wrote these drums or if somebody else did. It just sounds like a different drum composition, and I think the earlier drum composition was more unique to Intronaut, and you didn't hear any drummer that sounded like that in any other band. Whereas this, it's still really technical drums, but it doesn't sound as unique. My favorite song on this one would be Cubensis. I like the guitar riff to start. I think the song's pretty catchy. I actually think that their vocal performance on their two newest albums is better than on all their previous albums. They've started to actually kind of sound like singers. They do more cleans, they do more harmonies. You can still tell that they're not really like singers. It's just the guitar players that are kind of like harmonizing with each other, and they just kind of tend to like their vocal melodies are not necessarily like the memorable parts of the song. They just kind of like are there almost as like another instrument, and they're just both kind of like harmonizing with each other. Probably because neither of them are really lead singers. They're both kind of more backing vocalists, so they just kind of, it's kind of like having two backing vocalists and no lead, but it still sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
It's still a pretty good album. Maybe the other standout track would be The Cull. Heavy intro, catchy ambient parts, nice vocal harmonies. So I had that as my third least favorite.
Cool.
Now we're getting into our top three. What's your third favorite?
So I think my third favorite is Valley of Smoke. I think it's not like quite as experimental in tone as like Prehistoricisms that came before it, but I just think there's like some I think like there's a lot of really cool bass lines and sweet, like I really like the song Above because it's like got some really cool drums from Danny Walker like pretty much throughout the track. Cool bass lines. I like the song Correlations a lot. It's got cool like delayed guitar riffs and like some of those like chord swells with like the volume pedal. Cool bass lines, like neat
I only just realized that correlations might be like a pun. When you said it, it sounds like correlations, but it's correlations. I don't know if it's supposed to be a pun.
Yeah, me neither. I don't know what like many of these track names don't seem to have a whole lot of meaning.
But past tense is another song on that album, and it looks like it's a pun as well. Maybe, no.
Yeah, maybe.
Correlation. I don't know. Maybe I'm on crack, but correlations sounds like correlations, the one word.
Yeah, true. But I read somewhere that this album is supposed to be about LA or something. Like, that's like Valley of Smoke has something to do with Los Angeles because they're from LA. I don't know. So,
Cool. Yeah, I didn't look at any of the lyrics really, so I have no idea what any of these songs are about. You can't really hear what they're saying.
Yeah. But like you said about the previous album, the vocal performance is like really not like a key element to what makes the band, I think.
Yeah.
At all. Like you could do without it, and I feel like it would be pretty much the same. I mean, maybe you need something else, but the vocals are kind of just a texture.
Yeah, I think it's good that they're there, and they might feel like they're lacking if they weren't there, but it's kind of like another instrument, and it's probably like the least important instrument. It's like it's just to have like this sustaining like harmony, because usually when they're singing clean stuff, you'll hear both of them at the same time, and they just kind of harmonize in a very typical way.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I just thought this album was like, I think like part of why I like this is like when I saw this band, I found out about this band, I saw them live. I think we might have went to that concert together, but
oh yeah,
I saw them live for like Meshuggah and Animals as Leaders.
Oh yeah,
this was one of the songs that they played at that show, and I was just like, I remember, I think it was like the third track they played out of 5, and I remember it just being like, wow, this song's really cool. Like the whole sound of it was like really, really neat live, and I like listening to it.
Yeah, they're good live, for sure.
But yeah, so this is probably my third favorite, and probably like Correlations is my favorite track, but then Above is cool, and Past Tense is pretty cool too. There's some cool bass lines in Past Tense.
All right. My third favorite would be Prehistoricisms from 2008, their second album. I think it's an improvement on their first album. I actually start finding stuff on this one memorable, and it's even more so than Valley of Smoke.
Yeah.
And this album it feels like a journey, maybe more than all of their albums in terms of like how it flows, and it has that long instrumental song on it to end it out, the Reptilian Brain.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is cool. But I think my favorite song on it is actually the title track. I love the intro guitar riff. It's like super dirty.
Yeah. I like that track a lot too. I like how that dirty riff suddenly just becomes like a normal riff, and it didn't really feel that jarring after they go through like that weird sort of like where the sounds are kind of like
they're like overlapping, like polymeter, or
no, like the tones.
Oh, do they start off with like it being like lo-fi, like a really shitty tone right at the beginning, and then like they improve the tone? I've heard a lot of other bands do stuff like that, where like right at the intro they like play this riff with like this shitty lo-fi guitar tone, and then when the drums and everything comes in, it like hits hard.
I was thinking like it's like the music term for like when the two notes are like not in a chord. Something.
Dissonant.
Dissonant. Yeah. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah. Like they got some weird dissonance and like weird rhythms, like polyrhythms going on at the beginning, and then suddenly it kind of just like takes a turn, and then it's like, oh, now it's like a normal riff.
Yeah.
Back to that. I think that's cool.
Yeah, it is cool. That riff is pretty dissonant. Like I think it's like it's just like a tritone, like a diminished power chord. And that's the kind of riff, like if I wrote it, I'd be like, well, that's trash. Like you could never use it, but somehow they just like make it work and they make it awesome.
Yeah, it's cool.
It's really good. What else on this album? Any Port was another song that I have. That's my second favorite. It has pretty awesome drum outro. I mentioned the Reptilian Brain, their long epic, which is also super awesome. Yeah. That one's probably one of their more unique songs that doesn't sound as much like typical Intronaut.
Sure.
Droning sound that almost sounds like a sitar, and like the percussion I think is like congas or something. It doesn't even sound like a drum set at the beginning.
It's tabla. What's his name? The guitarist David. Like he
does
tabla. Yeah.
Okay.
Like Indian bongos kind of deal.
Yeah. Is this the album too? I don't know if on Void if they had any of the jazzy influence.
Not a whole lot. I think this is the album where they started bringing out like really the more progressive elements, like, like the more
kind of jazzy, proggy, and like some parts almost sound like psychedelic.
Yeah, for sure.
So this album feels like more of a journey. So I really like it.
Cool.
Your top two, number two.
Yeah, so number two for me is Prehistoricisms. I think this album is like really like it was quite a step forward from Void. Like it's really in a different style. I think it really nailed down those elements to me that were like made Intronaut interesting. And like the song "The Literal Black Cloud" is almost like a textbook example of those elements. Like you have the intro is this like really like heavy crunchy riff that's got some like really weird timing to it, and then it kind of like suddenly breaks into this like clean guitars, and the bass takes over, and it's really nice, and then it comes back into those like really crunchy, like heavy guitars in the chorus, and then later on it gets back into the bass taking the lead. So like I think this song I really like because it exemplifies like those cool elements of it, and especially of like the Joe on the bass taking the lead and becoming the focus of the song, where the guitars become that like support background texture. And I think it's a cool thing to do in like a genre like metal, where guitars are usually almost 90% of the time like the focus of the band. Everyone wants to hear the guitar solo, right? So when
in most metal, the bass is just kind of like doubling the rhythm guitar and like playing the root of like a power chord, and then there's like a lead guitar that does the interesting stuff. But this band is very different.
Yeah, so I think this album really showed out that part of the band, and they made really good use of Joe as a bassist and Danny too, because the drumming in this album is like incredibly good. Another song that I think is really cool, I like Sundial. It's a little bit like weird at first, but like the ending, there's like a bass solo at the end that is just like really neat. Like it's quite like interesting from like a harmonic perspective. Like the melody isn't like typical, isn't like a typical like in key kind of thing. There's a lot of weird like out of key notes thrown in, and then it sort of ends on this part with the like bass chords, which is like another thing that like not many people do, right? It's like an example of the fact that like Joe is like, he isn't just a guitarist playing bass, he's a real honest to goodness bassist. So he'll throws in these bass chords and it sounds like really cool and neat, especially with the fretless sound. So I think Sundial is quite cool. Like you said, the Reptilian Brain is like just an interesting track overall. It's like a very huge journey, and it's like the only Intronaut track that's more than 10 minutes long. So it stand out. So I think this album overall is just like pretty much every track is cool and different. And like you said, like you can pick out which is which because they don't have that samey vibe. I will agree with you with stuff like Valley of Smoke that it's pretty samey in terms of tone.
Whereas this one has more variety. I actually just thinking about playing chords on a fretless bass, and it's actually pretty ballsy. I've seen like people who are really good at guitar but only have played fretted, and they'll play like fretless guitar and they try to play chords, and the chords always sound like horrendous. So you have to have like really good precision to play chords on a fretless instrument. So that's pretty ballsy. I didn't even really think about it until now.
This is cool.
But
it makes sense. Like if he's very used, like on an upright bass, there's no frets, there's no fret lines.
But they don't usually play chords on upright bass. They usually play single notes.
What I just mean is that you would be very familiar with like where's the right place to put your finger. You just have that feeling, and it's probably a really good ear too. And there's probably some element of like, I think when he plays notes, he'll often do a vibrato, and then he could probably use his ear to like figure out where in his vibrato to like stop. And I think that's kind of a way to make sure that you get it perfect. That maybe contributes to the sound of the bass. My second favorite is Habitual Levitations from 2013. Subtitle, Instilling Words with Tones. Their fourth album. I think this really like cemented them among the prog metal greats. And they started doing more clean singing on this one, I think. They do maybe a little bit on the albums before it, but I think this is where maybe the clean started to be more dominant than the screaming. I think this was the album. I saw an interview and like they were saying that this was the first time that instead of just writing instead of writing vocals after they wrote the music, they were trying to write like the vocal harmonies during the music writing process.
Oh, okay. That makes a lot of sense. It totally sounds like that. I could totally hear that. The first, or my favorite song on it is The Welding. I think just hearing that part, the intro part, are they playing the strings like close to the tuning peg area in like a 5-beat pattern? You don't see too many people using that part of the guitar musically, so I honestly think this one, in terms of guitar, might be one of their best songs for guitar, because a lot of their other songs focus on drums and bass. This one actually had cool guitar stuff going on. And the other track on this one that stood out a bit to me was Milk Leg. Had some nice genty guitar riffing to open up the track. They use 5 beats a lot. I don't know if it's just this album. I think this album used 5 count rhythms a lot. Like they like their 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 kind of stuff. And they also used a lot of the jazzy clean chords. A lot of cool stuff. The guitar actually started to really sound like a main part of the band on this album. Right? It was like before this album, it was really in the background. I actually could hear a lot of guitar stuff that sounded really cool here.
I think Sore Sight for Eyes is a good example where like there's some really cool like chords and stuff going on with like the main. After like, I think like I'm trying to remember this track, but I think like the first part of it is like just like some heavy riff, but then it goes into this more like melodic section. But the guitars in that melodic section take a more center stage.
Yeah, it's a really, really cool album. I guess we're at your favorite now.
Yeah, so yeah, my favorite would be Addicted Levitation. I just thought this was like a really cool, creative album, like you said. They were doing a lot of interesting stuff, like with the welding. It's just a pretty cool track overall, like a lot of cool sounds, cool polyrhythms on the drums, kind of like going up, like mixing a lot of different meters. I like the song Milk Leg, I think is really cool. There's like another bass lead at the end, which is really neat. Sounds like cool. And the whole tone of that song is like pretty neat. It's just like pretty harmonic. I think Milk Leg is probably a song where their vocals as a band probably at like the peak. I think they're hitting the stride of like what they're capable of as singers and how that fits the music as a whole. So I think that's just like a standout track in terms of them hitting like all of the elements and using their strengths to build a good track. I think Harmonicon is another really cool piece of music, and The Way Down is a nice way to end the album. But pretty much, I think this is my favorite just because I think at this point they've kind of distilled all the pieces of their sound that worked, and it just ended up with like a lot of really like killer tracks. Like it's hard to pick one. If I had to pick my favorite, it would probably be Milk Leg, but each one of the songs is very good on its own, and they all have their sort of distinct elements, similar to prehistoricisms, where you can pick out like, hey, this is this song and this is that song. They hit a good stride there that they haven't hit since.
Makes sense. Yeah, my favorite is definitely different for yours. We're diverging on our ranking here, but mine is Direction of Last Things from 2015, their 5th album. And I actually find it memorable. I think that they continued with the guitars actually having cool stuff going on, whereas in the first, like their older albums, the guitars were very background. on this album, they still had a lot of cool leads, memorable guitar stuff, but they didn't lose the bass and drum awesomeness. Like, it was basically just everybody in the band is elevated to awesomeness. The vocals might be at their peak on this one too, in terms of just vocal performance and vocal production. I think my favorite song would be Sul Ponticello. It has a pretty awesome heavy intro with screaming, sweet guitar lines. I think the main verse riff has like a really odd time feel to it, maybe 11/8 or something like that. But all sorts, even if it's 11/8, I think there's like also polymetric stuff happening too. So like you can barely count this song because there's so many different things going on.
Yeah.
So this one's probably up there in terms of my favorite Intronaut songs. Love the lead riff over the Genty guitar playing at the end there. It's just really, really cool stuff. And then my other favorite song, this one, the City Hymnal, closing track, has a nice 7/8 riff, more polymeter, syncopation, their typical jazz chords over fretless bass sound. So a lot of the signature stuff that they do, but just they're just doing it at the top of their game, I think.
Oh, cool. I'll have to give this one a re-listen again to see maybe I maybe I didn't give it its fair shake.
Yeah, like I think everybody has different tastes, and a lot of it can also be like when you heard each album for the first time in your life, and like what your expectations were going into it. Like for me, the Direction of Last Things in 2015, that was like my first new Intronaut album that I heard, because I learned about Intronaut probably after Habitual Levitations came out. So all the stuff that I was listening to is old, and this is the first one where I was like, oh nice, Intronaut has released a new album, I'm gonna check it out. So it being like the first new one that I heard probably helped. And I think you got me into Intronaut, probably heard them maybe in your car for the first time and driving me to band practice, so that's awesome that we were able to hear a lot of cool bands together.
Yeah, for sure. I think you introduced me to Tesseract too, and like for a long time I was just like, Tesseract's so shit, I hate this band. And I started listening to them and I'm like, oh, they're actually like really good. So yeah, I think you mentioned that you were reviewing that with somebody else.
Yeah, I think Sean and I want to do one of these videos for Tesseract. If he is not able to do it though, I'll definitely look you up. We could do another.
Hit me up. Since I started listening to them, like I actually really like. I really like their new album, Sonder, and then the one before it, Polaris. I think those really cool. I actually really like their singer. So.
Yeah, Daniel Tompkins.
Yeah, I think he's quite cool.
Yeah, I like him too. Weird thing though, I actually really like the album that doesn't have him. I find it amazing. Altered State.
Yeah, that one's good too. I like the sax part.
Oh yeah, saxophone over gent guitars. Just what more can you ask for?
Pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a cool band. Maybe we'll do a top 3 Intronaut songs if you think that's possible.
I will. Give me just a minute, and I can just to collect my thoughts, because it's a pretty wide catalog.
All right, I'll do mine first.
Sure.
My favorite, Sul Ponticello. Second favorite, The Welding. And third favorite, Prehistoricism, in terms of songs.
So my top 3, they won't be in any like specific order. I don't think I can do that. But The Literal Black Cloud, I think, is really cool. Milk Leg.
Yeah.
And probably another one off of Habitual Levitation. But I like Sourcite Drive a lot too, actually.
Cool. All right. Thanks everyone for watching this video about Intronaut. Hope you heard some songs that you have never heard of before or some albums, and check them out. Really great band. You won't be disappointed.